after. If not, feel free to ask questions, slow down, whatever it is that you need. Okay? So, this is one of my favorite quotes of all time by Richard. Interpreting is probably the most complex type of event yet produced in the evolution of the cosmos. Seriously, if you haven't figured it out yet, it's really hard. It's really, really challenging. Most of you have had techniques. So you talked about active listening, passive listening, concentration, focus, all of those different skill sets. And you read the entry to practice skill sets last week. All of those skill sets you have to have almost mastered in order to be able to do this thing effectively that we call interpreting. So it's really, really challenging. It's a more harder job because it's physical and mental. So I just love that quote. That's what we do in our with our hands. No big deal. So we're going to look at how researchers have defined interpreting and what it is that we do, what happens in the process. And there's a couple of different approaches that researchers have taken. One is an information processing approach, meaning we're just taking in information that we hear and extrapolating meaning from it, and then we just transfer it and put it out there. Okay, it's all about the information. It doesn't take into consideration the target audience, the consumers or their culture. It doesn't take into consideration any of that. It's just about information. Okay? There's other processes and models that represent theoretically what happens in our head as we're trying to interpret. Remember last week we talked about the 3 basic stages of interpreting? What were they? Comprehension. Part of comprehension, analyzing part of comprehension. Yep, reformulation. That's that word. That's that $10 word. We switch it into the target language. Yes. Comprehension, reformulation, and expression. Exactly. So again, remember that before we get to the expression part, all of this is happening cognitively. It's all happening in our heads. It's all a mental process. So some researchers have looked at what we do and broken down those things into stages, which is really cool, and I am fascinated by it. Then there's also the sociolinguistic aspect of what we do. That's when we finally take into consideration the societies, the cultures, the communities, the norms, the traditions of the interaction between the people. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Yeah.
Can you go back one?
Yep.
Okay. So the 3 processes that you're talking about, you can't use all 3 of them at the same time. You're telling us that these are the 3 and we have to.
No, I am telling you that researchers have looked at interpreting just from these perspectives. However, we use all 3 of these when we work. If we're doing our job effectively and we're doing it right, we have to process information, right? We have to use our mental abilities to figure out what the method means. We have to take into consideration cultural norms and cultural deviation. So we use all of these, but to try to help people understand the process, to try to help teachers teach it, to try to help people learn the process, researchers have broken it down into just separate little paradigms or domains. But when we interpret really, we use all of them. Does that help?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So remember that all of the models, the process models that we're going to look at, we're going to overview a couple of them for you. We're going to zone in on just one that I think is the most user-friendly, yet still the most detailed. They're all hypothetical representations. Why is that? What? Why? Why can't we know for sure? Because it's inside your head. Yeah, we can only assume, based on the products that comes out, what's happening in your head. We can hear the input or see the input. We have no idea what's going on up here. Really. So they're hypothetical. Most of the researchers who have created these models are interpreters who have been working in the field for a long time. They're interpreter educators like myself and your other teachers. We see the mistakes that students make, and we kind of can make educated guesses as to what's happening, but it's just hypothetical. Everybody's mind works a little bit different, which is why everybody's interpretation is different. Make sense? Okay. So the purpose of these models is to look at the different aspects of what it is that we do and to find one that works for you. Now, that being said, you kind of have to follow your teacher's lead, right? Your teacher's in charge of the class. So Carly might like a guy named Shields' approach or the Gish approach. I like Dennis Copley's model. We all use different ones because they work better for us. It's really great that you have different teachers with different perspectives because you get inundated with all of them. And then as you start going through into your higher level skills classes, you can pick the one that works for you and will help you find out where your struggles are and where your strengths are. Okay? Questions? Done? All right, so let's start out with a couple of them. Remember we said 3, information processing, cognitive, and sociolinguistics. The first model is a woman named Sandra Gish. Sandra Gish has done a lot of work on information processing and how that affects interpretation. And again, like I said to Jeff, we all have to process the incoming information. Do you remember when you had to summarize a spoken English text in panel? Or summarize an ASL text that you watched? That's information processing. What the panel was looking for was if you could ascertain the speaker's goal that you're listening to, figure out what the main theme is or the main point holistically, not the main point in one sentence, but the entire 5-minute segment. What's the theme? And then what's an objective? What kind of details do they add to that one? What's an objective? What kind of details do they add? This is the way that we process information. In order to transfer it from one language to another, it has to be clear and it has to make sense. You'll see a lot of interpreters and a lot of students, maybe at the level that you're at right now, tend to process information at the phrasal or the lexical level. So a speaker is speaking, and this is what I see. No, hold on. Detail, detail, detail. They make no sense because I'm missing how they link to the original goal of the story. So, does that make sense? You guys want? So, as you're thinking about moving into interpreting, we have to remember that we're discourse analysts. We have to listen to the discourse, figure out what are they saying, why are they saying it, what's the main idea. That's the first thing that we have to convey, so that our audience can at least follow along, and it doesn't look like science salad, and there's a bunch of details that there's no links in here at all. They have no idea. And I'll say, kudos, you got all of those little details. I saw all the details, but I missed the whole main point. So your deaf audience is going to walk up going, I have no idea what that lecture was, because they missed the big picture. So we always want to first listen and ascertain what's the main point of this utterance, of this sentence, of what this person is saying. What's the main point? Let me get that out there first, and then I'll add in the details that I heard related to that. Make sense? So it's kind of a hierarchy of information processing. We always want to get the main idea, we call it goal to detail, detail back to goal. So we make those connections. Make sense? Okay. So that's information processing. That's one model. Do we do that? Yes, always. In every interpretation that you do, that should be your goal. Another woman named Betty Kalanimus came up with this really cool, albeit extremely ridiculous model of the interpreting process, and I'm not going to show it to you. But basically, it's the 3 stages that we talked about. Pretty detailed about stepping, actually. It's all these, you go here first, you get the message, and it goes in here, and it goes out there, and it comes over here, and basically, if you look at this and analyze it, it's 3 steps. Comprehension, reformulation, and instruction. That's what we do. Okay, that is one. Nothing that you're going to need to know besides she has been given acknowledgement for creating this type of system. Doesn't really give us much help though. Then we have Deborah Russell. Deborah Russell is an interpreter educator up in Canada, and hers is a meaning-based interpreting model. So here's another researcher who has been interpreting for a long time, teaching interpreting for a long time, and she says, this is what we do when we interpret. First, we look at contextual factors, the setting, the situation, who are the participants, what's going on, where am I, what's the purpose for me being here as an interpreter. Then we have to comprehend the incoming message, the source language, be it this or be it this. We have to think about the target language structure, the linguistics, so if we're going English to ASL, we think about how am I going to convey that into ASL, figure out the sentence structure we're going to use, and then put it out. Not much different than our 3 stages, right? Not much different than the information processing. Although information processing is basically just looking at the comprehension phase. But they're all pretty straightforward. They just, as researchers decide to use different word choices, they expand on one area that they like better. There's a gazillion different models. So this is the one that I like the best. This is one that you have the handout for in front of you. This is Dennis Coakley. And if you were to look in any spoken language interpreting book that talks about models of interpreting, they use this model. Dennis Coakley's is probably one of the more detailed, yet easiest to understand. He breaks down the process into 7 steps. And if you flip over on the back, you'll notice my little notes show the 3 stages on the left-hand side. So he breaks down comprehension into a complex of about 5 steps. Reformulation into 2, 4, 2, and 1. Okay. But when we start talking about what it is that we do, and you start interpreting, and you listen to something, like last week, you listen to something, and you put something out, by looking at what that is, I can't necessarily tell exactly what the issue might be if it's not correct. So then I start asking questions based on both of the stages to see if I can figure out what was happening during that. And most of the errors that are going to occur are going to occur in the first 2 stages. By the time it gets to expression, you should be able to put it out there. Sometimes we may produce a sign inaccurately, or we produce a sign informally when it should be formally. That happens, but that's something that's easily fixed. Comprehension phase, you have to understand that message, you have to know what they mean, and then putting it into ASL or English. So if we are not 100% competent in ASL and English, we're going to struggle trying to get it into the target language. Clear so far? All right. So bear with me for a while, and let's break this down. Okay. So if you look at Coakley's model, his first stage is message reception. Okay? First stage, very first thing we do, receive the incoming message. This means that we have to have decent hearing. If we don't have decent hearing, we need to have amplification systems, an FM system or a hearing aid to help us so that we can hear it. But why do you think there might be a problem with this first stage? what could happen? Here I stand, I'm ready to interpret. Elena is going to give a speech. She starts talking. What could happen in the very first stage? Can you hear that? Some noise in the room. I'm sorry? The speaker could mumble. The speaker could mumble. She could talk softly. Yes. So right away, bam. If something happens in that first step, you can't put something out. There's no way to put anything out. So if I'm standing here watching you, and I go, all right, come on, go ahead, start interpreting. And you're like, I'll say, they just said something. What happened? What's your response? I couldn't hear it. Tell me what it was what happened. So now we know either the room was too loud, we have to adjust the environment, or we have to put your hearing test or get your hearing aids or whatever we need to do. You need to move closer to the speaker so that you can hear. But if nothing comes out, I know what the issue is. So I can go right back to that. Now we know that that's not a serious issue, so it's not something that we have to really worry about in your ability to interpret. But does that make sense? Okay. Same thing this way. The very first thing I have to do is receive the message. If it's dark in the room and I can't see the signer's hand, I'm too far away, they're signing, I don't know, British Sign Language or something, I can't even receive the message to begin to understand it. Okay? And that's a problem. That could be a problem, and it could be why the interpretation is breaking down. Make sense? Comments, questions? Okay. The next stage is preliminary processing. This is the act of actually hearing the morphology and the phonology of the English language if we're going English ASL. We hear the sounds, we see the body, we see the gesture, we try to figure out what it is that they're saying, why they're saying it, listen to the words, try to apply our English grammatical knowledge to what's coming in. It's preliminary. Words are coming in. I'm hearing words. I got them. I understand the words. They make sense to me. So they're using the body, language, facial expressions to go with it that modifies the word a little bit. I recognize that. It's all preliminary processing. Okay? And then we start breaking down the message and we start analyzing what does it mean, what does it mean, what does it mean. Okay? Some examples of things that could go wrong. You could mishear. Someone could say the word death and they really meant death, or you thought you heard death when they really were saying death. You could just mishear them. It happens to us sometimes. So if you mishear it, but you think you heard it correctly, it's going to come out incorrect. But that's the process. There's nothing you can do until it comes out, and then either your partner or you will realize that you made a mistake. Make sense? Preliminary processing. What's the meaning? What's the meaning? Start identifying the vocabulary that's being used. Do I recognize the words? Do I know what they mean? Then we move on to the all-important short-term memory. Shannon.
It's really about the topic of questions. So if somebody does like misspeak and says death instead of death, but you know what they meant, do you say it wrong because they said it wrong, or do you go for meaning and say what they meant?
It depends on the situation. Usually, we are going for meaning. People misspeak, they have hesitations, they use hedging, we know what's going on. We need to get to the message. That's why we're there. But in certain cases, like education, especially with elementary kids, because the teacher won't perfectly say something incorrect. You have to be a few kids will give them back the right answer or say, oh no, this is opposite, that's wrong. So in those situations, you would want to give the wrong information, exactly what you heard. That's why we always show up 15 minutes before an assignment in the job, and we talk to the speaker to find out what the goal is and what the plan is for the day. Yeah. But usually it's too much cognitive effort to put out the wrong message and then put out the right message, and it's too much physical effort. you know what they meant. They're stumbling over the words, they're nervous to be speaking, whatever it may be. Pull back a minute, just give the correct information. Saves everybody. Does that make sense? Answer your question? Yeah. Great. All right, so short-term memory. Short-term memory, it really is a catch-22. You have to have long enough lag to understand the message, but not too much lag that you will drop and lose information. Okay? So when we say chunk, we talk about chunking information. Usually it's a sentence. Right away, as soon as you start interpreting, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to hear one or two words and you're going to pick up your hands and you're going to want to start clapping it. Okay. And what's going to happen? English, 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 English. You don't even know where the speaker is going yet. You haven't lagged back enough to wait to get a concept completely in order to pull it out. But some people, think. You do have my blood there to sit with me. But sometimes we'll try to really hold back, or people mumble, or they false start, and they say something, and they go, no, that's not what I meant. So you're holding, waiting until something makes sense to you, and you can put it on an ASL that now you've lost the first detail or the second detail that they said. So it is play with your short-term memory process. Each of us has a different capacity, so you have to figure out where yours is most comfortable. Really great skilled interpreters who have been doing it for a long time usually stretch their short-term memory and hold their lag for about 10 seconds. Most of you will probably start about the 3 to 4 to 5 second range, and if you end up around 5 or 6, that's about average.
What if somebody doesn't have to do it because I'm like bored on Friday email? And that's a problem for this.
Yeah, just practice. You can Google memory games online, and you will come up with tons of memory games that you can practice. You can do a lot of listen to a lecture, and then the next day, take out a piece of paper and try to summarize it. So any of those your short-term memory capacity is about, let's go back and look at the exact statistics. Short-term memory is about, I think it's about 12 minutes. Once you hit your capacity, it'll either transfer into your long-term memory or it'll be gone. But transferring it purposefully into your long-term memory takes effort. You know, when you're trying to memorize a phone number, you repeat it several times. So repetition of something will get into long-term memory, and it'll stay in that little file cabinet that we have back there, up there. But if you don't rehearse it, you don't practice it, you're not aware of it, it'll be gone. You could probably ask any working interpreter the job that they had yesterday, what were the details of their job? We have this whole thing about confidentiality, right? But honestly, we can't remember it. I don't put any of that stuff into my long-term memory. It comes in, I interpret it, things are going great, I drive home, I don't remember the details. Because I'm not holding on to them. I can't. Well, I could, I'd be genius. But you can't. So you just let it go. So it disappears automatically. Good? Any questions about that? So you'll have to play with yours. You'll have to find your comfort. How long does it take to remember? After consecutive, you move on to simultaneous interpreting, you have to triple tap. Because while you are waiting, then you finally go, okay, that's enough information, I can make that into an ASL sentence. You start reformulating, here comes another one. While you're Alright, so the size of the chunk depends on your background knowledge. If you're interpreting for something that you know about, police, arrest, the law, whatever your specific niche is, if you're interpreting about that, you have all this background knowledge that you can draw from, it's easier to hold on to that stuff. You need maybe one word to key in all this information that you can draw from. But if it's some brand new field that you don't know much about and you're trying to remember, your short-term memory is going to be much less. You're going to have to get that message up quickly, otherwise you're going to forget what these people are saying. Does that make sense? Okay. We usually stack information in our short-term memory, and what happens usually is first in, first out. So, take out a piece of paper. Okay, without writing yet, just sit back and listen. Okay? Today after class, I have to go to the grocery store because my house is empty and there's nothing in my refrigerator. So I have to get milk. My husband drinks almond milk because he's on this paleo diet. So I have to get a gallon of almond milk. And my daughter likes chocolate. I don't really drink milk. I plan on making chicken cacciatore for dinner time, so I need some chicken breast. I like skinless, boneless because that's the best for me. So I gotta get some chicken breast. I have to remember that. How these 6 or 7 breasts. And then I like to add bacon, and I don't have any in the house at all. So I'm gonna stop and get bacon. I also, unfortunately, need toilet paper because we're out of that too, and paper towels. What else do I need? I know that I will need vegetables, so I'm going to get probably a green, a yellow, and a red pepper because I like making it very, very colorful. So green, yellow, and red, probably one of each is all I need. Some onions, Vidalia. I like those for that. What else? Asparagus on the side because that's really good. I like to always have them on hand. And then maybe a salad, I'll get some cucumber and cherry tomatoes to go with it. Okay, so what we usually do, now I'm trying to distract you, is stack information. So first in, so we have a list, you're interpreting, you're listening, you know, and ASL we have the listing technique, right? As soon as you start to key into the fact that there's going to be a list, we go like this, right? With your non-dominant hand. All right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, whatever it may be. And if you use visualization in your short-term memory, you chunk less lexical items. If you can make whatever that is, tomatoes, mozzarella cheese, into a picture, then you don't have to remember all of those items. So it means that there's less information that you have to store. Okay? If I get your piece of paper and recreate my list.
Just the list of information.
Just the list, just the items. You might group them together based on what I said, and it may help you specifically with your memory, but just the list.